what is the most valuable advice you've ever been given, and by whom?
I would say the influences on me were more reading, and it's like books that you read, and if you think, clearly people at MIT influenced me. I mean, Ed Gilliland was one guy, and I remember Ed, who was actually chairman of department, and he was a legend. I mean, he had some health issues. He finished his PhD in 9 months, and it must have been good because he got it. And MIT isn't the easiest place in the world. And he was in the oil and gas business, primarily oil, petroleum, if you like. And he had a heart issue, and he went to see his physician. The physician said, "Look, you've got to stop doing your consulting at the level you're doing it at." And the recommendation was that you double your consulting fees. And anyway, 15 months later, he doubled his consulting fees. He was doing exactly the same amount of work and getting double the money because he was worth it. So being at MIT was certainly a huge influence. And these guys were out there solving major problems. I mean, digital equipment, all the Route 128 companies that were spawned, Raytheons, and these companies are still, DEC isn't still going, but a lot of these companies are still going. But Peter Drucker, I mean, I remember 1964 managing for results. Andy Grove, Jack Welch. I mean, I actually nearly took a job at GE in the plastics industry. Hell, I might have been, running GE if I'd stuck around. But Jack Welch was more later. Andy Grove was after. But Drucker, the effective executive, which was 1967. And just good common sense. I mean, you don't have to be a genius to be an innovator or an entrepreneur. You've got to be focused. You've got to realise that it's 99% perspiration, as Thomas Edison said, and 1% inspiration. So there's a lot of building blocks, and you've got to have a very high tolerance for bad news because things go wrong. You have to expect that things are going to go wrong. But Drucker, Peter F. Drucker. And then, of course, in the mid-'80s, he wrote a book on innovation, which was also incredibly good. And Andy Grove, high output management, was... and Andy was, ironically, and it's interesting that both Jack Welch was a PhD chemical engineer, University of Illinois, and Andy Grove, when he came from Hungary, he could hardly speak a word of English. He went to CCNY in New York, ended up as valedictorian and did his PhD at Berkeley. And he's a PhD chemical engineer that's the founder of Intel. I mean, microprocessors, what is this? And Jack, who worked in the plastic, he was an undergrad chemical engineer at Massachusetts. And I mean, you don't have to be a chemical engineer, whatever to be, but there were two guys that are icons of US business. Whereas Drucker actually was a big confidant of Alfred P. Sloan. And of course, the Sloan fellowships all around the United States, and of course the Sloan School of Management at MIT. And he was an undergrad, the guy that basically put General Motors. And look at General Motors today. My God, they've lost the plot. See, they're not innovating. It's just dreadful. I mean, the way that wagon. I mean, you want to have these guys survive. And the epitome of what Alfred P. Sloan does. And he was an MIT electrical engineer who went to General Motors and actually built the whole company. And that was another influential book, My Years with General Motors, which was a little bit dry. But what he said was that too often, he said, if a guy is on the board of General Motors, and I think things have changed, he said, I don't want some guy that cursorily reads the board notes. He's got to get involved. I don't mean operationally, but strategically involved in the business. And I want the goddamn guy to do his homework. We are not paying people to be slothful, lazy. They've got to contribute. And he said, and if I regret anything, it's when I knew that I had to move somebody out of the business and I took too long to do it. And when I did it, I realized that I should have done it minimally 6 months, but probably a year before. So when you see things are going wrong, you can't fudge it. You got to change it. And you're probably doing the person a favour by doing that. Another guy who was influential was Cecil Green, And Cecil, actually, he was English, went to San Francisco, and during the San Francisco earthquake, the family moved to Vancouver in 1906. But he was a wonderful man. He transferred from UBC to MIT, finished a degree in electrical engineering, and actually worked for General Electric, and was in the Middle East and came back, and he founded a little company called Texas Instruments, and never had any children. And Ida Green, his wife, he moved to La Jolla, where I currently live, and there's the Green Building at MIT, there's the Green Building at Oxford, there's the Green Building at University of British Columbia, and there is Green Hospital in La Jolla, and there's the Cecil and Ida Green Faculty Club at the University of California, San Diego, which is a wonderful university, but fairly young. And I went to, and I think Cecil was 98 years old, and Irwin Jacobs, also an MIT guy, the founder of Qualcomm, and Qualcomm now has a market cap of like 70 billion. You know, code division, multiple access, CDMA for cell phones, mobile phones, and Irwin at this dinner to honour Cecil said, Cecil, you don't know how you've influenced so many people so often, and there were guys from Stanford and MIT and so forth that were at this celebratory dinner, and he actually lived till 101. But so he had a long life. But he'd given away. We tallied up at this dinner that he'd given away $200 million, and so you have to be a philanthropist as well. I mean, what are you going to do with the money? Stick it in your pocket? So that's why I like doing some stuff like this in a modest sort of way with the Centre for Innovation and Entrepreneurship here at the University of New South Wales. I mean, giving a little bit of money to that, I think it's just you have to do it. And I said to my kids, you're all, if you want to go and get rich, but, you're going to be left a certain amount of peace, and the rest of it's going to go to the Farrell Family Foundation. So we're having a lot of fun. And the kids about 6 years ago said, what the hell's this all about, my inheritance going down the toilet? They're not going to starve to death. They can live very nicely on what they're being left. But so we sit around a table every 3 months and decide, whether we're going to fund something at an art institute, but mainly we focus on engineering, education, science, technology, and trying to move that ball down the field to make sure kids get exposed to science and engineering and technology, because this is a very complex world, and if you're making decisions, you have to base it on fact and reason and awareness, not emotion. We all get emotional, particularly things that we think are important to us, but you shouldn't have emotion. You shouldn't have the stomach or the heart leading the head. Very important. That's why we have to focus on this very important, I call it STEM, or everybody calls it STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Very important that people get exposed to that.
Peter, on behalf of the University of New South Wales and all of our guests tonight, we want to say thank you very much for your contribution, both in terms of your personal example, your leadership, and your can-do attitude. It really is a great inspiration for all of us in our day-to-day lives. Thank you.
Well, that's a pleasure, but you don't want to get too far ahead of yourself. And the last thing you want to be is a martyr. I mean, because martyrs end up with the arrows in the back. And I don't want the arrows in the back, or even the front. But I mean, like any of these things, one of the key things is that it's all done with teamwork. I mean, hell, I can't, this year, give or take a bit, ResMed's going to do, we won't quite make it, but we'll be close. We'll be within a little distance, within the 900 million, but almost $1 billion in revenues. And that's US, that's big dollars. And the market cap, I mean, obviously with the crazy market we've got now, up and down like a yo-yo. Although the stock's been up in the last few days, but it's like, I remember a guy saying to me, one of Warren Buffett's guys was on our board, Lou Simpson, and Lou said, we were sort of moaning about the stock price, and Lou said, look, Peter, forget the goddamn stock price. He said, look, in the short term, it's a voting machine. In the long run, it's a weighing machine. And that's exactly it. you know, if you like a stock, you like the management, you like the ethics, the business, the space, whatever, invest in it and stick it in a drawer. People who try to play the daily market, I think they're completely nuts. It's nothing more than gambling. So you've got to build for the long term, and the balance is taking care of the short term, but not getting hoisted on the petard of the long term and sacrificing of the short term, I should say, on the altar of the short term and sacrificing the long term. That's bad news. You've got to play both sides of the street. You've got to invest in the future, which means putting a certain amount of money in product development, research and development, but more product development, so that you actually are going to have a future. But it's a team effort. I mean, there's not one person that does anything, as you know. I mean, you know, we've got something like 3,500 people now. We started with 6. But we're in a marathon, and we're just lacing our shoes. And so if I had any advice for people, I'd say, look, and this is really quoting Andy Grove. I mean, the last place you want to be is late into a small market. That's a dog. Now, if you get early into a small market, you can survive. If you get late into a big market, you can survive. Where you want to be is early into a monster market. Now, that's where we are. Now, that way you can make a few mistakes and not bet the farm on the business. However, it doesn't mean you want to go out there making mistakes, but I mean, invariably things happen and you make bad calls and so forth. The important thing is to be able to recover from the bad calls, but just you've got to keep, you know, persistence and determination, as Calvin Coolidge said, are omnipotent. One of the guys I really, really admire in the world is Michael Faraday. And Faraday, when I was at MIT doing a thesis, I had to read some papers by this famous MIT professor. His name was George Scatcherd. And Scatcherd quoted him as saying that he held his theories by his fingertips so that the least breeze of fact might blow them away.